CJ Flyer back with another YouTube video. Today teaching you the latest and greatest position change strategies in college football 26. In a previous video I had stated that position changes were mostly useless as they added dozens of skill caps to a player every time you change their position. However, following the July 24th title update, position changes are now incredibly useful and can be advantageous in increasing a player's overall potential. As stated in EA's patch notes, you can now change a player's position within their current position group without penalty to their skill caps. These position groups are defined as the following: running backs being fullbacks and halfbacks, offensive linemen being left tackles, left guards, center, right guard, and right tackles, defensive linemen being left edge, right edge, and defensive tackles, linebackers being Sam, Mike, and Will, secondary players being cornerback, free safety, and strong safety, and kicking specialists being kickers and punters. So for example, I'm in an Alabama Dynasty here, and when I position change Dorian Longo from halfback to fullback, and then back to halfback, you'll notice that the skill caps are the same as they were before doing the two position changes because both the halfback and the fullback are in the same running back position group. You may also notice that a player may have different sets of skill caps and skill rating categories when changing to a different position within their current position group. This brings us to tip number 1 of this video, which is to utilize position changes within a player's current position group to maximize skill ratings potential. In this same example of Dorian Longo, who by the way is a randomly generated recruit, you'll notice that as a halfback, he only has 6 more skill blocks available to purchase for the hands and power skill categories. However, when we change Longo's position to fullback, he now has 9 to 10 skill blocks to purchase for the hands and power skill categories. So if you wanted to transform Longo into more of either a power back or a receiving back, the best strategy would be to save up enough skill points to spend on 9 to 10 skill blocks of either the power or hands category, then change positions to fullback during the position change window on National Signing Day week, then purchase the desired skill blocks, and then change positions back to halfback and continue purchasing any other skill blocks or abilities that you desire. Keep in mind, of course, that any position change in College Football 26 will result in losing any pre-existing abilities that are not applicable to the position and archetype to which the player is changing to, which is why I generally recommend spending a player's skill points on skill ratings before spending them on abilities. Bringing me to tip number 2, which is to utilize position changes for the purpose of changing a player's archetype at their current position. In this example, you see I have an agile offensive lineman named Julius Ivy that I'd like to convert to a pass protector for my pass-heavy offensive scheme. Notice that as I max out his pass blocking skill category and then go to change positions, he will now be converted to a pass protector archetype because of the high pass blocking rating. Now, of course, it's not a popular decision to change an offensive lineman from agile to pass protector archetype, as agile offensive linemen are highly valued in this game. However, the raw strength archetype is one of the least popular archetypes in this game, as for whatever reason, EA has decided to make skill blocks very expensive to purchase for raw strength. So to avoid dealing with these expensive skill blocks for the player's entire college career, focus spending all skill points on one skill category, such as pass blocking or footwork, and continuously check position changes to see if the designated skill category is high enough of a rating to warrant a change in archetype. Okay, so now we've covered changing a player's position within a position group and how a player's progression can benefit from it. But what happens if you change a player's position outside of their current position group? In most cases, changing a player's position to one that is not part of their current position group will still result in an increase in the total number of skill caps, even when changing that player's position back to their original position afterwards. However, there is now one exception after the title update, which brings me to tip number 3. From the tests I've performed so far, it appears that any underclassmen from real-life college football that have a fairly large quantity of existing total skill caps already may actually see a reduction in their total number of skill caps if you change their position back and forth. A great example to showcase this is Bryce Underwood, Michigan's top recruit, which many people have complained online about having way too many skill caps and maxing out well below 90 overall because of them. However, as Bryce Underwood is a freshman, if you changed his position to halfback, for example, and then back to quarterback within the same position change window, you'll see that his total number of skill caps are aggressively reduced which is huge for his progression potential. This neat trick will also work for other underclassmen as well. Again, they have to be real-life players and have to already have a fairly large quantity of total skill caps, let's say at least 20 to 30, because in attempting this with underclassmen from real-life college football that don't have many skill caps, from my tests, they either see minimal benefit or just a reshuffling of their total skill caps, and in some cases, a slight increase in their total skill caps. And as for the upperclassmen, never attempt this with the real-life upperclassmen, as from my testing, it always seems to result in an increase in the total skill caps. And since they're already upperclassmen when starting your new dynasty and have 0 skill points to spend, it doesn't make much sense to position change them outside of their current position anyways. So what about randomly generated recruits? We've been talking about real-life college players, but what about the ones that EA generates as you progress through Dynasty? On screen now, I have some examples of changing players' positions outside of their position group and then back to their original position. And although they have an increase in total skill caps from the position change, there is still some benefit to doing this. Bringing me to tip number 4, which is once you max out a player's skill category with existing skill caps, and you've upgraded other skill categories to their desired level, change the player's current position to be outside of their position group and then back to their original position. In this example, I have speedster wide receiver Chester Brissy. Now when going to the ratings tab in the player card, we can see that he has 2 skill caps, preventing him from maxing out his quickness skill category and consequentially preventing him from being able to obtain the platinum takeoff ability, which, as I explained in a previous video, is still overpowered in College Football 26. However, once I finished maxing out his quickness with the 2 skill caps, in addition to maxing out other skill categories, I changed his position to halfback and then back to wide receiver. Although the total number of skill caps for Chester increased, you can see that some were reshuffled as there are no longer any skill caps for quickness. I'm now able to upgrade quickness to obtain 99 acceleration, which is the minimum requirement for the platinum takeoff ability. Of course, it's not a guarantee that the skill caps will be reshuffled as you desire, but if you've already maxed out other skill categories of the player as you prefer, it's worth attempting later in their college career as an upperclassman. I should also mention that continuously changing a player out of their position group and back to their current position does not keep reshuffling their skill caps. They get reshuffled once and then they're left alone at that. And with that being said, I actually have a bonus tip which we can call, let's say, tip number 4B. And this is more of a warning really. Do not, I repeat, do not change positions directly from wide receiver to cornerback, cornerback to wide receiver, offensive guard and center to defensive tackle, and defensive tackle to offensive guard and center. From my testing, doing any of these direct position changes results in a reduction to awareness, and doing the direct position change of cornerback to wide receiver results in a huge reduction to catching. I'm talking like anywhere from 10 to 30 in reduction. Now, in order to overcome this obstacle, if there is a player that you would prefer to have his position changed from wide receiver to cornerback, or just any of those other examples, what you can do instead is, instead of going from wide receiver to cornerback directly, you can change that player from wide receiver to safety, and then from safety to cornerback. Or vice versa, you can take the cornerback and change his position to free safety or strong safety, and then do another position change to wide receiver. This seems to bypass the ratings penalty that comes with any of these direct position changes that I previously mentioned. Now, last but not least, let's talk tip number 5, which is about athlete recruits. As EA also stated in their patch notes, athlete recruits can now have their initial position change done without any skill cap penalty. However, after an athlete recruit has their initial position group set from an initial position change, any position change to one outside of the set position group will result in an increase in total skill caps. So let's go over a couple of examples now. First, from the position change menu, click and hold R2 on the PlayStation 5 or the right trigger on the Xbox Series X or S, and scroll to the very bottom of the list of positions to ATH for athlete recruits. Let's start with the top athlete recruit on this list, Devin Henderson, who from the East-West playmaker archetype would indicate that he was recruited as a halfback. You can see that he also has an elite dev trait. So if I were to not change Devin's position and sim ahead to the next week, he would automatically be set to halfback. However, I want to set Devin to cornerback as my secondary is a little bit weak on this roster. Now, simming ahead to the following week and viewing Devin's player card, you can see that despite being recruited as an athlete at halfback, setting him as a cornerback through position changes turned out to be a great decision, as he only has 9 total skill caps and potential to be a great cornerback. If I were to change his position next offseason to halfback, he would see an increase in total skill caps since his position had initially been set through position changes to cornerback. I can, however, change his position next offseason to safety without a skill cap penalty, the same as how it works with recruits that don't come in as athletes. Now, does this mean I can put Devin from an athlete to any position and see him thrive? Strangely enough, when I changed Devin's position from athlete to left tackle, despite his overall starting at 33, he still only has 9 total skill caps and technically could work his way up to a higher overall to the point where he is playable in the game at that position. Although this is possible, I would still advise against it, as it requires additional skill points to reach a higher overall than if he was placed at a different position initially. That being said, I also tested this with an athlete offensive lineman named Lorenzo Richard with a normal dev trait and set his initial position to left defensive edge, where he actually started with a higher overall than at an offensive line position. So I recommend to always look at which positions an athlete may start at a higher overall and what your position needs are for the upcoming season, and use that information to make an informed decision on how to utilize position changes for that athlete recruit. Something else to note with athlete recruits and recruits in general, it appears that the better the dev trait for the randomly generated recruits, the lesser the total number of skill caps that the player starts with at their current position. So in conclusion, position changes are finally more meaningful in College Football 26 after the first major title update after release. Let me know in the comments down below which positions you've had the most success with so far, and click one of the videos on your screen now for some more College Football 26 tutorials.